Good evening. I'm Doug Dahl with the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, the Target Zero Manager for this region. Thank you all for being here. I invite you to come forward a little bit if you like. And to begin our World Day of Remembrance event this evening, I'd like to invite up Councilmember Knutson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming together today for the World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims. My name is Gene Knutson. I serve on the City Council. I'm in for Mayor Linville tonight, who's at home with the flu, so I'm the one for you. So here we go. Across our country and around the world, people are gathering like we are here to remember the many millions killed and injured on the world's roads, together with their families, friends, and the many others who are impacted. This is a global event, and it's a local event. Here today, we remember the loss of those in our community, including the 13 people killed in traffic crashes last year in Whatcom County. Today, we also want to thank our emergency responders, recognizing the burden that these reoccurring disasters place on those who, as part of their service to our community, bear witness to our loss. And yet, there is hope. In 2018, we have had less traffic fatalities in the United States, less traffic fatalities in Washington, and less traffic fatalities here in Whatcom County compared to the previous year. This day is an opportunity to envision a future where the trends continue until we don't have to suffer from these preventable tragedies. Our communities and the leaders in our communities are a key part of building a positive traffic safety culture. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge those community leaders who are here today because they care for the lives of all road users in our county, city and county. I know that April Barker from the Bellingham City Council is here. Hannah Stone from the Bellingham City Council is here. Let's give our first responders and the elected officials a round of applause. Thank you for your commitment to make our roads safer in Whatcom County. In just a moment, you'll hear personal stories from several members of our community. Lieutenant Claudia Murphy with the Bellingham Police Department, Deputy Lonnie Baum with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, Division Chief Scott Reichman with the Bellingham Fire Department, and Erica Wiseman, the mother of Christopher, a victim of a traffic crash here in Whatcom County. Following these stories, we'll be sending out officers and deputies on a special traffic emphasis focusing on high-risk driving behaviors in our community. As the patrol cars depart, I invite you to join in a commemorative walk to remember the victims of these traffic crashes here in Whatcom County by carrying a candle for the person you came to remember. Now I'll invite Lieutenant Claudia Murphy to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Claudia Murphy, and I serve as a lieutenant with the Bellingham Police Department. And I got asked by Doug to speak tonight, and it definitely is an honor to be able to speak and share an experience that I had. One of the things I do want to say, though, our experience, I feel, pales in comparison to the loss suffered by the families of those who have perished in traffic accidents. But I do feel very blessed and honored that this Day of Remembrance includes the first responders who respond to these, because while there's a huge loss and a scar with the families who lost their loved ones, each one of us carry scars on our hearts from the scenes that we have gone to where someone has been lost, because no loss is easy to witness, and every loss is personal to us, whether we knew the person or not. And there's one particular evening that sticks out in my mind for a number of reasons, because one of the things that we pledge to do is to make things better and do no harm. And sometimes I question, how do I do better and do no harm on a night where I have to knock on someone's door and tell them their loved one has passed away in a car crash? So the only thing that I can pledge, and that I have pledged since the day I got hired and will until the day I leave this profession, is that under zero circumstances will I ever make it worse. And so by our actions and words, very easily can we make it worse. But we can always make it so that it is not worse by our actions and our words as well. So that's what I pledged to do. And on this evening, it was a very, very, very big crash. It was one vehicle. It veered off the road, but the vehicle was filled with 6 teenagers, 4 boys that were all 13 or 14 years of age. And the vehicle landed on its side, and sadly, one of the boys passed away on that night. And what sticks in my memory is that I had to decide how I was going to tell the parents that their son was gone and had died when I didn't know any of the children in the car, and all 4 boys were brown-haired, brown-eyed boys with T-shirts and basketball shorts on. And we had to decide which one of the boys was the one who had passed away, while the other 5 occupants of the vehicle all went to the hospital. So I will never forget the moment where there were 5 sets of parents who were going to get a glimmer of hope because their child was still with us. And there was that one set of parents who I was going to have to dash their hopes for the future of their child and how their family had been set up until that day. And luckily for me, we were able to, with the help of so many of the first responders, the police that were there, the firefighters that were there, the hospital staff, we were able to carefully and very slowly and methodically identify the young men at the hospital so that we were sure of the young man who was at the scene was the person I was going to have to tell his parents that he was the one who had died. And so that sticks in my mind because of the teamwork that it required at the scene, the gentleness but yet firm hand it took from all of us to maintain the parents, because we couldn't let them get to the scene, and then to carefully be able to put the parents in the hands of our wonderful support officer staff so that they can help them through that loss and walk them through the near steps in the future. So for me, this day is huge, and it feels extremely inclusive to be able to stand here and be part of a World Day of Remembrance where law enforcement and first responders are also included in the aspect of the loss of people who are tragically killed on our roads. And again, I say it pales in comparison to the loss of the family, but I feel honored to be able to say that we too walk around with scars on our hearts. And I just pledge to all of you that take that pledge of whatever it is, we just don't make it worse when we go to the scenes. We always make it as even as we can, because there's no way we can make it better. We can only do that which allows the family to remember that day in the best sense of the word, so that we don't make it worse. So my honor is all to you, the families who've lost people on the roads in Whatcom County in the last year. It's a never-ending story, but we are always here for you. Thank you.
I'm Deputy Lonnie Bauman with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, and I'm currently assigned to the traffic unit. So Doug called me a while back and asked if I would speak tonight and perhaps talk about a crash that affected me. And I told him, I've been to so many that it's hard to remember most of them. And it's true that anyone who's been in law enforcement or anyone who's been a firefighter for any amount of time, we've been to so many of these that it's impossible to remember all of them. So some of the crashes are fuzzy memories for me, and admittedly, some I've forgotten altogether, but not all of them. Probably close to 20 years ago, I was working the night shift and I got dispatched to an injury collision. I was quite far away, so by the time I got there, fire personnel were already on scene. A vehicle driven by a drunk driver had crossed the center line and collided head-on with a car that was in the oncoming lane of travel. The drunk driver, who was by himself, was pronounced dead at the scene. I remember the other car, which was perpendicular to the road, and it was in the middle of the road, had 2 women in the front seat. Their injuries didn't appear to be serious, but they were trapped, surrounded by crumpled metal. The firefighters were using their jaws of life to free them, so my attention turned to a young boy who was on a gurney near the rear of the car. He'd been in the back seat and was the son of one of the women that was in the front seat, and all of them were visiting from outside of the area. The boy was probably around 9 or 10, and he laid there on his back as a firefighter was talking to him. And I remember seeing that he didn't look injured and being relieved at that. Because although he had a bit of a scared look on his face, he wasn't crying, and he didn't appear to be in any kind of pain. He was just nodding his head yes or shaking his head no in answer to the firefighter's questions. And while I was standing there, the firefighter squeezed the boy's foot and asked if he felt that. The boy shook his head no. He squeezed his other foot and asked the same question, and again, the boy shook his head no. I can't explain the feeling that I experienced at that point, but in that moment, I remember thinking a few different things. I remember thinking that I knew what that meant, and the firefighter knew what that meant, but that the boy probably didn't. I remember imagining the doctor having to have that conversation with the mother, and then later the boy. I remember how impressed I was at how the firefighter carried himself while this was going on. He didn't miss a beat, and he continued to talk in a good-natured manner while he spoke to the young boy. And as I started to feel my eyes well up a bit, I remember saying to myself, man, you got to keep it together. Looking at that boy laying on the gurney with a scared look at his face, I felt like I needed to do something, so I went to my patrol car where I kept some stuffed animals in my trunk. And there I paused for a second thinking that, is he too old for this? Is he going to think this is stupid? But I thought, what the heck, I'm going to give it a try. So I picked the most boyish animal that I had in my trunk, and I returned to the gurney, and there I smiled and I said, hey, this little fellow would like to hang out with you if you'd like. He said nothing, but he nodded his head, reached out, grabbed that little animal, and he clutched it to his chest. Didn't really know what else to say at that point, but I felt I should say something, so trying to keep my voice even, I smiled and I pointed at the firefighter and I said, hey man, these guys are great, and they're going to take good care of you, okay? The boy nodded his head like he believed me. Medics transported the injured, cars were towed, Washington State Patrol came and investigated the scene, and soon the roadway was clear like nothing had happened. I would not see that boy again, and I never followed up on his injuries, mostly because not knowing was better for me. While I knew that the signs of the scene lent to him being paralyzed, I made myself believe that because he looked totally fine, that maybe it was just temporary, and maybe the doctors worked some sort of magic at the hospital and he was up and running around in no time. Right or wrong, I didn't want to know if he was permanently disabled, and I chose to believe that he was going to be just fine. Turn the clock ahead a few years, and I was at a gathering and an acquaintance came up to me and said, hey, I was just at a trial where your name came up. And she went on to explain, and after she gave some details, I realized that it was this crash that she was talking about. Apparently, it was a civil case against the establishment that overserved that drunk driver. Nervously, I asked if the boy ended up okay. She acted surprised when I asked this because she thought that I knew, and she said no. He was in a wheelchair. He's paralyzed from the waist down. As soon as those words left her mouth, I froze. I couldn't speak, and I felt sick. And immediately I could see that boy laying on the gurney with a scared look on his face. I have 4 boys of my own, and they all play sports year-round. And I've spent years watching them running up and down the football field and the basketball court and around the bases. And because one person chose to drive after having too much to drink, that boy never got to do any of that. And now as a young man, he's not able to run around with his own children. As I said earlier, I've forgotten the majority of the crashes that I've been to, but not this one. This is one that will stick with me forever. The Washington State Traffic Safety Commission has an aspirational goal that is coined Target Zero. And loosely defined, it is the goal that we will reach a point where there are 0 traffic fatalities. Realistically, if we're being honest with ourselves, we probably won't achieve that because there's always going to be people that make poor decisions when they're driving. But here's the deal. I like that slogan because it reminds us that some traffic fatalities is not okay. And if it was one of our loved ones that was lost in a collision, and they were just one of a few or just one of some traffic fatalities, that wouldn't be okay. So it's why many of us here will be out on a traffic emphasis tonight looking for those drivers making poor decisions and taking enforcement action. Because maybe we won't ever achieve that goal of 0, I believe it is one heck of a goal we're shooting for. Thank you.
A little bit shorter. So my name is Scott Rickman. I'm the Division Chief of EMS for Bellingham Fire Department. I want to thank you for having us out tonight and acknowledge the families that have had losses out on our roads. I can't imagine how difficult that is. So I've been fortunate enough to be here for the last 13 years in Bellingham. It's a great community, and looking around at all the law enforcement folks here and other firefighters and whatnot, I think I probably recall a bunch of wrecks that we've all been on, or accidents and that kind of a thing. But when I got asked to do this, I started thinking about things that kind of changed me, and I think back to something from about 2 years ago when I was still an engine captain. Nice sunny, bright sunny day, middle of the afternoon, and weekend kind of a day. And for us in the fire department, we get our stuff done, and we try to hang out at the station, enjoy each other's company, and just wait for the calls to come in. And I remember hearing our pager go off, and this car that was apparently wrapped around a tree. So our engine company rolled, and where I was at, we're a long way away from everybody where I was working at the time. And I rolled around the corner and remember giving my radio report and just thinking, this is not going to be good. The car was completely wrapped around the tree. It had led with the top of must have been going 100 miles an hour at the time, and wrapped completely around the tree. And the first thing I thought is, we need more people here right now. My crew, who's a bunch of volunteers, and thank goodness for what they do, but were wide-eyed and didn't really know what to do. And as we coached them through getting the engine turned around, I went over and looked, and this individual's pinned in the car, and they're still breathing. And I'm thinking, wow, we got a shot at this one. We might have a shot. And as we scrambled to get the engine turned around, as we scrambled to get a chain to pull this engine off the tree and extricate this person, I watched this kid take his last breath. We had to go back 3 hours later, and once we got that car off the tree, to do body removal. And I remember looking at my crews, and the looks on their faces was incredible. I mean, they just looked beat down. And as much as I think we all leave parts, we all leave things on scene, we all leave a piece of who we are on every call that we go to, law enforcement, fire, whatever. And to think that a family had to go through that is just devastating. That just makes it that much harder. What I can't help to think now is, as I think back on all these different incidents we've been on, in particular this one is, and I have my own 2 boys as well, is who was this person going to be? Who was this person in our community? What did they do? What was their backstory? How could they have affected lives up the road? What was their future? And that person doesn't have that opportunity now because of a moment of bad decision making, a moment of just irresponsible behavior because you're young and make some bad decisions. So thank you for our law enforcement officers who are out there trying to get these down to zero, because for all of us, if we can get it there, it's going to save us all a lot of heartache, and especially these families that are going through these things, just a lot of heartache in the long run. Thanks for being here today.
My name is Kendra Cristelli. I'm the Director of Whatcom County Support Officers, and I've been asked by Erica and Larry Wiseman to tell their story about their son, Christopher. First of all, I want to thank the World Day of Remembrance for letting me share the story about my son, Christopher. He was 20 years old, a very sweet boy with a good heart who gave unconditional love and always was willing to teach and share anything he had to offer. Chris was always full of energy and on the go. He was a positive human being with an open mind. He volunteered at the Lighthouse Mission when he wasn't going to school, studying, or working. On Thanksgiving and Christmas, I would make a huge turkey, and he would make up plates of food with all the fixings and pass them out to the homeless on the street. We keep this tradition of Chris alive today. Chris received awards from the mayor in Maui, Hawaii for receiving an A+ student from kindergarten to 9th grade. Maui, Hawaii was his home. We moved to Arizona, and he finished his high school at Red Mountain High in Mesa, Arizona. He was a top leader of the Latin program, Si Se Puede. That helped Spanish students. He spoke Spanish and English fluently. He was a responsible and hard worker at Best Buy. He never missed a day of work and was always happy with a beautiful smile. He had a great personality who brought light to the world. On January 29, 2013, my nightmare began when I was startled by the doorbell at 12:30 in the morning. I was feeling my heart pounding, and my deep pain was indescribable. When I opened the door, I saw 2 officers standing in the doorway. I knew the news was not good. I was weak as they proceeded to tell me my son Christopher had been in a serious car accident a block away from home at the Bellis Fair Mall exit in Interstate 5. It was raining and foggy that night. Chris came over the bridge and lost control of his car, spinning into the concrete light pole at the bottom of the exit. He hit the pole right at the door of his car, crushing him and killing him immediately. Christopher was our only son. Sorry. His death was devastating to us. Chris and I were so close and so much alike. I felt like I no longer fit in this world. It was so quiet around the house with Chris gone. When he was home, there was always the noise of his talking, laughing, singing, and fooling around. Telephone calls, and of course, his reggae music. Now I only have his memories left, but memories of Chris's 20 years were hardly enough to last me a lifetime. Chris only lived in Bellingham 4 years. He studied at Whatcom Community College. He almost finished his studies to be a psychologist. He was an honor student with a full academic scholarship. We had no idea Chris had touched so many people until they showed up at his funeral. They came from all over the country. His friend Holly Swartos gave a living tribute of a grove of 20 trees in honor of Christopher to embrace the warmth and light of heaven. It was unbelievable, as is Chris being gone to us. We had come to believe that God needed him for his purposes more than we needed him here. But we know that Chris will always be with us until we meet him again. We quietly accept the pain regarding our son. We'll always just be there. We appreciate the 20 years Chris was in our lives. He always will be our angel. When the accident happened, I was alone. My husband was working in Pennsylvania, and I couldn't get home until the next day. I want to thank our support officer. She was an angel sent from heaven to help that night. She stayed with me until my friend from Canada could get here to be with me. The next day, she helped transfer Christopher to the funeral home. I'm not sure I could have handled all of the pain and sorrow without her kind and understanding words that night and the following days. God bless her forever and ever. We wish her long life and happiness.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Roger Funk. I am a patrol lieutenant with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office. I've had an incredible career with the Sheriff's Office. I'm in my 24th year, and I spent a large portion of that in the traffic unit, where I did traffic enforcement and investigated collisions, including fatality collisions. And as you've heard from all the other speakers, the impactful is huge. I drive around, I look at some of these pictures, and I recognize scenes that I investigated, and I hold those memories forever. That's tough. But to the law enforcement officers here tonight, I want to talk to you about prevention and something that you guys can do that's incredibly hard to measure, but it's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to tell a story to illustrate that. When you guys make traffic stops out there, you may be preventing a tragedy that can cause all this heartache and all these memories. And the story I have is, as a motorcycle deputy, one of the things I wrote a lot of tickets for were the guys on motorcycles that wore those fake little helmets. Big pet peeve of mine. I made a lot of enemies, a lot of people that really disliked me for those tickets that I wrote. Well, one day I went up to a crash, and it was a motorcycle crash. And the person stood up, and he's all road rash, he's beat up. And he came up to me and goes, "I need to thank you, you saved my life today." I'm like, God, I don't think I've ever met this guy in my life, and I certainly wasn't here when he crashed. He says, "You wrote me a ticket a few weeks ago, and I thought you were a real jerk." Okay, I'm waiting for the good part of this story. I wrote him a ticket for one of those helmets, and he had with him that day a full-face helmet. And through no fault of his own, he hit a deer that day at a pretty high speed, and he went down. He got beat up pretty good, but he survived because of enforcement action that I took that I thought I would never be able to measure a result for. So when you guys out there are stopping people for speeding, you write a person for a seatbelt ticket, you may be preventing a tragedy later that will be a forever memory that you may have, families may have, support, fire. It's just immeasurable. So I want all you guys to go out there tonight, be safe, make a difference, and think about those future memories that we're trying to not have by our positive, proactive efforts. So thank you all the law enforcement officers and first responders out there, and thank you to the families that are here. So, thank you.
As our law enforcement officers depart for their patrol, I invite anybody who'd like to join in the candlelight walk to come up to the table and get a candle, and we'll be departing shortly. Thank you.